Air India flight crashed. Vishwas Kumar survived and revealed the shocking truth. In the chilling aftermath of Air India Flight 717's devastating crash into Ahmedabad's doctors' hostels, where hundreds perished, only one man emerged from the wreckage: Vishwas Kumar. What he carried with him from that inferno wasn't just the scars of survival, but a shocking truth that would shake the very foundations of the aviation world. Please support us by subscribe, like, and share for more, with activating the notification bell. Thank you. The fluorescent lights of Indira Gandhi International Airport hummed with a sterile indifference to the kaleidoscope of emotions beneath them. Vishwas Kumar, a man in his late 30s with eyes that held the weary wisdom of 1,000, deadlines met and missed, clutched his worn leather briefcase. Inside, nestled amongst presentation notes and a half-eaten energy bar, lay a small framed photo of his wife, Priya, and their 7-year-old daughter, Sia. He was flying to London, a crucial business trip that promised a promotion, a better life for his family, but the usual excitement was muted by a subtle, unshakable dread. Vishwas was a creature of habit, a stickler for punctuality. He arrived early, cleared security with practiced ease, and settled into a corner cafe, nursing a lukewarm coffee. His flight, Air India 717, bound for Heathrow, was scheduled for a midnight departure. The terminal buzzed with the usual symphony of hurried footsteps, loudspeaker announcements, and the excited chatter of travelers. Yet amidst the familiar cacophony, a faint, almost imperceptible dissonance tugged at Vishwas's nerves. He couldn't quite pinpoint it. Was it the ground crew's hushed, urgent tones near his boarding gate, or the slightly too long delay in the boarding announcement? He dismissed it as pre-flight jitters, the anxiety of leaving his family behind even for a few days. As the boarding call finally echoed, a collective sigh of relief swept through the waiting lounge. Vishwas joined the steady stream of passengers, his gaze drifting towards the massive aircraft dominating the tarmac. It was a Boeing 787 Dreamliner, sleek and modern, a testament to human ingenuity. But as he stepped onto the jet bridge, a flicker of something unsettling crossed his vision. A mechanic, hastily tightening a panel near the landing gear, wiped sweat from his brow, his face etched with a look that Vishwas couldn't quite decipher. Was it fatigue, or something akin to apprehension? The mechanic quickly straightened up, offering a forced smile to a passing flight attendant, and Vishwas again dismissed it as his overactive imagination. He found his seat, 11A, a window seat offering a panoramic view of the airport lights twinkling like scattered diamonds. The cabin was a picture of serene anticipation. Families settled in, couples exchanged quiet words, and business travelers like himself adjusted their ties, preparing for the long journey. The flight attendants, impeccable, in their uniforms, moved with an effortless grace, offering pillows and blankets. Vishwas plugged in his headphones, the gentle strains of a classical symphony attempting to soothe his unease. He closed his eyes, conjuring Priya's comforting smile, Sia's infectious giggle. He reminded himself why he was doing this. For them, the familiar rumble of the engine starting, the gentle pushback from the gate, the slow taxi towards the runway. These were all comforting rituals of flight. Vishwas peeked out the window as the aircraft lumbered into position, the runway lights stretching into the inky blackness. A final, powerful surge as the engines roared, pressing him back into his seat. The plane accelerated, faster and faster, blurring the lights outside. He felt the familiar lift, the sensation of defying gravity as AI 717 ascended into the night sky. For a moment, his anxieties evaporated, replaced by the quiet hum of the engines and the vast, peaceful expanse of stars outside his window. He took a deep breath, telling himself it was all in his head. The unsettling calm, however, persisted, a silent harbinger of the chaos that lay just beyond the horizon. He couldn't shake the feeling that something, somewhere, was not right. He pulled a novel from his briefcase, but his eyes kept returning to the darkened wing, almost expecting to see something amiss, a loose panel, a flickering light. The vastness of the night sky seemed to amplify his internal disquiet. Hours blurred into the rhythmic drone of the aircraft. Vishwas had drifted into a fitful sleep, lulled by the gentle turbulence and the distant murmurs of his fellow passengers. He dreamt of Sia's laughter, a sunny park, a sense of profound peace. Then, without warning, the world tilted. It began subtly, a tremor, a vibration that felt deeper than usual turbulence. Vishwas's eyes snapped open, the classical music in, his headphones abruptly cut out, replaced by a sharp metallic screech that seemed to tear through the very fabric of the plane. His heart hammered against his ribs. The flight attendant's calm voice, moments earlier announcing the start of dinner service, was replaced by a strangled gasp over the intercom, followed by static. Then came the jolt. Not a bump, but a violent, sickening lurch that sent loose, items flying. The overhead compartments burst open, spilling luggage like confetti. A terrified scream erupted from the back of the cabin, quickly joined by others, a chorus of primal fear. Vishwas gripped the armrests, his knuckles white. The plane bucked violently, a wounded beast thrashing in the air. The internal lights flickered erratically, casting grotesque shadows that danced across the faces of terrified passengers. He could see their expressions, disbelief, then dawning horror. Finally, pure, unadulterated panic. A voice, strained and urgent, finally, cut through the intercom. "This is your captain. We are experiencing severe technical difficulties. Please remain calm. Brace for impact." The words, delivered with a desperate edge, were a death knell. Calm. Brace for impact. The two phrases clashed violently in his mind. Vishwas barely registered the sudden, sharp drop in altitude. The sensation was akin to being plunged into a bottomless pit, his stomach lurching, his ears popping violently. Oxygen masks dropped from the ceiling, dangling uselessly as the cabin lights went out completely, plunging them into suffocating darkness, broken only by the dim, emergency floor lighting that cast an eerie, green glow. The metallic screech intensified, a guttural roar now, accompanied by a deafening howl of wind rushing through a ruptured fuselage. He caught a glimpse of sparks, a shower of angry orange and red, erupting from somewhere near the wing. "Oh my God," he whispered, the words choked by the sudden G-forces. His mind raced, a chaotic scramble of images. Priya's face, Sia's smile, a half-finished conversation. He felt the plane spiraling, a terrifying, uncontrolled descent. He knew with an absolute certainty that this was it. This was the end. He squeezed his eyes shut, bracing for the inevitable. The impact was not a single sharp crash, but a series of devastating blows. First, a thunderous crack that reverberated through his entire body, like the tearing of metal. Then, a grinding, sickening crunch as the plane splintered, followed by a violent rotational force that slammed him against the side of the fuselage. He felt the seatbelt dig into his flesh, preventing him from being hurled into the chaos. The screams were no longer distinct, but a cacophony of terror and agony, punctuated by the rending of metal and the shattering of glass. The world became a blur of sound and sensation, crushing force, searing pain, and an overwhelming smell of jet fuel and burning wires. His last conscious thought was of his family, a silent apology for leaving them, a desperate wish for their safety. Then, darkness. A vast, echoing silence broken only by the ringing in his ears and the slow, agonizing realization that he was still alive. He was in the wreckage amidst the scattered debris, the broken dreams, and the chilling, absolute silence that followed the storm of destruction. The descent into chaos had ended, leaving only the chilling quiet of utter devastation. He lay there, disoriented, unsure if what he was experiencing was real or some horrific hallucination. The metallic taste of blood filled his mouth, a grim reminder of the nightmare he had just endured. The silence was the most terrifying sound, a profound, echoing emptiness that swallowed the frantic screams and metallic groans. Vishwas slowly became aware of his surroundings, a fractured reality, pieced together by pain and primal instinct. He was still strapped into his seat, but the entire section of the plane around him had been twisted and ripped apart, a grotesque sculpture of mangled metal and shattered plastics. A faint light, the first hint of dawn, filtered through a gaping hole where the aircraft's roof once was. His head throbbed, a dull, insistent drum. He tasted blood, metallic and acrid. Carefully testing his limbs, he managed to unbuckle himself. His left arm hung limply, a searing pain shooting through it with every movement. He pushed himself up, every muscle screaming in protest. Air was thick with the acrid smell of burnt fuel and dust. Smoke curled lazily from distant parts of the wreckage. He looked around, his eyes struggling to adjust to the dim light. The scene was apocalyptic. Seats were strewn everywhere, some upside down, others crushed beyond recognition. Personal belongings, a child's teddy bear, a half-read magazine, a passport, lay scattered like discarded memories. Then he saw them. Bodies. Silent, still forms draped in seatbelts, some partially buried under debris. A wave of nausea, cold and sharp, washed over him. He fought it down, focusing on survival. He called out, his voice hoarse. "Hello? Is anyone there?" Only the wind whistling through the torn fuselage answered. He moved cautiously, stepping over twisted wires and sharp shards of metal. He stumbled, his injured arm screaming in protest. But he pushed on, driven by a desperate need to find a living soul. He found one. A young woman no older than her early 20s was stirring faintly a few rows away. Her leg was pinned under a section of the overhead bin. Her eyes fluttered open, wide with terror and confusion. "Water," she croaked, her voice barely a whisper. Vishwas tried to move the debris, but it was too heavy. His injured arm screamed in protest. He had to think. He scanned the immediate vicinity, his gaze landing on a crumpled flight attendant's cart, miraculously still upright. He managed to pry open a small compartment, finding a half-empty bottle of water. He crawled back to the woman, offering her the bottle. She drank greedily, some water spilling down her chin. "Thank you," she managed, her voice gaining a fraction of strength. "What happened?" "I don't know," Vishwas admitted, "but we need to get out of here." He looked around, trying to make sense of the fragmented puzzle of the crash. That's when he saw it. He remembered the faint, unsettling dissonance at the airport, the mechanic's hurried movements, the flicker of concern in his eyes. As he surveyed the wreckage, his gaze snagged on something eerily familiar. Near where the plane's left wing should have been, a section of the fuselage was torn open, revealing a mangled mass of wires and pipes. But what caught his attention was a specific panel, barely hanging on by a thread. It was one of the access panels near the main landing gear, the very one the mechanic had been tightening with such urgency. And then he saw it. A small, critical-looking bolt, cleanly sheared off, resting on a crumpled piece of insulation. It wasn't just sheared. The break looked old, corroded, almost as if it had been stressed for a long time, on the verge of failing. He remembered the sparks he saw just before, the impact erupting from the wing. He remembered the captain's desperate words. Severe technical difficulties. It wasn't just a technical malfunction, a random act of fate. This felt different. He knelt closer, ignoring the pain in his arm. He noticed the irregular pattern of corrosion on the sheared surface of the bolt, distinct from the fresh tear marks on the surrounding metal. This wasn't a fresh break caused by the impact. This was a failure that had been brewing, a ticking time bomb. The mechanic at the airport, he must have seen something, known something was wrong, and tried to fix it, perhaps without the proper replacement parts or under immense pressure to get the flight out on time. The unsettling calm at the airport, the mechanic's look of apprehension, it all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Vishwas felt a cold dread mix with a burning anger. This wasn't just a crash. This was negligence, a critical component, compromised, overlooked, or hastily fixed. This was the shocking truth. He felt a surge of resolve. He had to survive. Not just for himself, but for the silent victims around him. He had to tell their story. He had to reveal what he had seen. The glimmer of hope was no longer about his own survival, but about bringing justice to those who couldn't speak. He looked at the young woman, who was now staring blankly at the mangled surroundings. "We're going to get out of here," he said, his voice firm, "and I'm going to make sure everyone knows why this happened." The first rays of sunlight pierced through the wreckage, illuminating the scale of the disaster. The young woman, whose name Vishwas learned was Anya, was in shock, her leg badly injured. Vishwas knew they couldn't stay. The smell of jet fuel lingered and the risk of fire was too great. He had to find a way out, and he had to take Anya with him. Using a piece of twisted metal, he managed to pry open a section of the fuselage, creating a makeshift exit. The plane had crashed directly into Ahmedabad's doctors' hostels, a building that now lay in ruins, its structure decimated by the immense force of the impact. The air was thick with the dust of crumbling concrete and the acrid scent of aviation fuel. Vishwas knew their chances were slim, but the image of the corroded bolt, the shocking truth, fueled his determination. He fashioned a crude splint for Anya's leg using a piece of seat padding and some torn fabric from a curtain. He then helped her crawl out of the fuselage, supporting her weight. Every step was agony for both of them. Anya whimpered with pain, but her eyes held a flicker of hope, a reflection of Vishwas's unwavering resolve. They moved slowly, meticulously, through the debris-strewn ground, carefully navigating around twisted metal and shattered glass. The grim reality of their surroundings settled upon them. The crash had claimed not only the lives of those on board, but also those on the ground. Vishwas could see uniforms amidst the rubble and his heart ached. Many doctors, likely off-duty or resting, had passed away in this tragic incident, adding another layer of horror to the already devastating scene. Days blurred into a brutal struggle for survival. They rationed the meager water Vishwas had found. For food, they relied on what little they could scavenge from the wreckage and the surrounding area, careful to avoid contaminated items. The nights were the worst, the freezing temperatures and the haunting silence amplifying their fears. Vishwas kept them going with stories of his family, of the life he intended to return to, a future where justice would be served. He spoke of the bolt, describing its corroded surface, the negligence that had doomed Flight AI 717 and the innocent lives in the hostels below. Anya, despite her pain, listened intently, her face a pale mask of exhaustion, but her eyes reflecting a growing understanding and shared purpose. On the fourth day, as hunger gnawed at their insides and exhaustion threatened to consume them, they stumbled upon a faint, winding path leading away from the immediate devastation. It was barely visible, overgrown with weeds, but it was a path. Hope surged through Vishwas. They followed it for what felt like an eternity, the path slowly widening, showing signs of infrequent use. Just as despair began to creep back in, they saw it. A small, dilapidated hut nestled in a clearing. A grizzled old man, a solitary hermit living off the land, emerged from the hut, startled by their appearance. His eyes widened in shock at their ragged, injured state. Vishwas, despite his weakness, recounted their ordeal, his voice cracking with emotion as he described the crash, the horrifying realization of the faulty bolt, and the additional tragedy of the doctor's hostel. The old man, though initially skeptical, listened patiently, his gaze fixed on Vishwas's determined eyes. He offered them warm tea and some stale bread, his silence conveying a hesitant belief. The old man, named Kedar, had no phone, but he knew of a small village a day's journey away, accessible only by a treacherous mountain trail. He agreed to guide them. The journey was grueling, but the promise of rescue, of finally being able to tell his story, propelled Vishwas forward. Anya, leaning heavily on him, mirrored his resolve. When they finally reached the village, a small, isolated community nestled. In the valley, the sight of people, even strangers, was overwhelming. The villagers, though initially wary, were moved by their plight. News of the plane crash had not yet reached this remote corner of the world. They provided first aid, food, and most importantly, a satellite phone. Vishwas, his voice trembling, called the emergency services. He identified himself as Vishwas Kumar, a survivor of Air India Flight 717. He repeated the words again and again, until they seemed to sink in. There was a pause on the other end, then a flurry of questions, a mix of disbelief and urgent concern. He recounted his story, concisely but with unwavering conviction, emphasizing the corroded bolt and the devastating impact on the doctor's hostel. The rescue operation was immediately mobilized. Within hours, helicopters descended, a beacon of hope in the vast, unforgiving wilderness. As he was being lifted into the helicopter, he clutched Anya's hand, a silent promise passing between them. He had survived. Now he had to ensure the truth he carried would also survive, that it would be heard no matter the obstacles. The ordeal of escape was over, but the fight to reveal the truth had just begun. The days following their rescue were a blur of medical attention, debriefings, and a relentless media frenzy. Vishwas and Anya were hailed as miracles, their survival a testament to human resilience. But amidst the headlines celebrating their escape, Vishwas was determined to shift the narrative from a story of miraculous survival to one of damning truth. Hospital rooms became makeshift interrogation chambers. Investigators, aviation experts, and government officials pressed him for details. Vishwas, though still weak, recounted his experience with unwavering clarity, focusing on the corroded bolt he had seen, the peculiar state of the access panel, and the mechanic's anxious demeanor at the airport. He drew diagrams from memory, describing the location of the sheared bolt, the texture of the corrosion. His story was consistent, detailed, and utterly chilling. Initially, he faced skepticism. Technical malfunction was the prevailing theory. Some hinted at post-traumatic stress, suggesting his memories might be distorted. But Vishwas was unyielding. He refused to let the truth be buried. He spoke to journalists, not just about his survival, but about the shocking truth he had witnessed. His calm, resolute demeanor, coupled with Anya's corroborating testimony, she remembered him pointing out something to her, even if she hadn't understood its significance at the time, began to chip away at the wall of disbelief. A seasoned investigative journalist, a woman named Maya Sharma, was intrigued. She sensed Vishwas's sincerity, the deep conviction in his eyes. She listened to his account, not just with a reporter's ear, but with a human's empathy. Maya, known for her relentless pursuit of truth, began her own independent investigation, cross-referencing Vishwas's claims with internal industry whispers, past incidents, and maintenance logs. The pressure on Air India and the aviation authorities mounted. The sheer public interest in Vishwas's story, amplified by social media, forced a deeper inquiry. Finally, under immense scrutiny, the crash site was revisited with Vishwas's precise directions. Search teams, guided by his detailed description, located the exact section of the wreckage he had identified. And there it was, the corroded sheared bolt, still attached to the mangled access panel. Forensic analysis confirmed Vishwas's observations. The bolt had indeed suffered from long-term fatigue and corrosion, a failure that predated the flight. The revelation sent shockwaves through the aviation industry and the public. The shocking truth was out. Air India Flight 717 had not merely crashed due to unforeseen circumstances, but due to a critical mechanical failure caused by a corroded bolt that should have been identified and replaced during routine maintenance checks. The mechanic Vishwas had seen was questioned, and he eventually broke, admitting to being pressured to patch up minor issues quickly, overlooking the severity of the corroded bolt to avoid further flight delays and cost implications. The aftermath was profound. A comprehensive investigation was launched into Air India's maintenance protocols. Several senior executives were arrested, charged with negligence and endangerment. New, stricter aviation safety regulations were implemented globally, emphasizing independent oversight and rigorous inspection of critical components. The public outcry was immense, demanding accountability and justice for the victims, both on the flight and, tragically, on the ground at the doctors' hostels. For Vishwas, the journey was far from over. He became a reluctant but powerful advocate for aviation safety. He spoke at conferences, shared his story, and lobbied for stronger consumer protection laws for passengers. He and Anya, who had recovered from her injuries, formed a bond forged in the crucible of shared trauma, becoming lifelong friends and co-advocates. His relationship with his family, particularly Priya and Sia, deepened immeasurably. They had faced the unimaginable, and their reunion was a testament to their enduring love and resilience. Vishwas, though forever marked by the tragedy, found a new purpose. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a witness, a voice for the voiceless, a catalyst for change. The scarred landscapes of his memory slowly began to heal, replaced by the satisfaction of knowing that the truth, no matter how shocking or painful, had ultimately prevailed. His story, the story of the Air India Flight 717 and the corroded bolt, became a somber lesson, a stark reminder that in the skies, as in life, truth and vigilance are the ultimate guardians.